Hello, I'm Susan Guthrie, the creator of Divorce in a Better Way and the host of the Divorce and Beyond podcast. And I'm going to do another episode of my frequently asked questions in divorce for my Divorce in a Better Way website. So today we're going to talk about child support. This is one of the most commonly Googled questions. What is child support? How is child support calculated? What is child support for? Those are all very common questions that people ask around divorce. So first off, child support. Child support is an amount of money that is paid, usually weekly, but it can be paid in accordance with the payor's pay, if they get paid bi-monthly or bi-weekly. Sometimes the court will order payment as the person is paid. But every state in the country has something called child support guidelines. Now, those guidelines are essentially a formula that will determine how much money is paid by the non-custodial parent to the custodial parent. So the person who has the children with them the majority of the time is the person who's going to receive the child support in most cases. And what the child support guidelines do is basically take the incomes of both parents. So under the laws in this country, across the board, both parents are charged with supporting their children. So if both parents have income, the guidelines are going to take both parents' income into consideration. So the chart really works from taking, one parent's income, the other parent's income. There are certain allowable things that can be deducted from that gross income. And for the most part, that's the things you can't get away from, right? Like taxes and health insurance costs and self-employment costs and union dues and things like that. So certain expenses you do take out of the gross. Then you come down to a net for both parents. That net is combined together into a joint net, and the guidelines work off of a chart. So you would literally take whatever that joint net is, let's call it $1,000, and for two children, $1,000, you come down to a number on the chart, then that is the full amount of child support that under that state's laws should be available each week for the children. And then each parent is responsible for their percentage share of that amount. Now, the person who is the non-custodial parent is going to sit down and write out a check or pay. These days we don't write out checks anymore, right? Things are paid through apps like Decomply or Venmo or, things like that. But that parent is going to make their payment to the custodial parent. Now, the custodial parent has an obligation toward child support, but they don't sit down and pay themselves. The law considers that they are contributing to the child support, their children's support, roof over the head, paying the mortgage, putting gas in the car, etc., food on the table. So generally, child support is there for that type of expense. It's there for the basic maintenance of the children, putting a roof over their head, putting clothes on their back, putting food on their table, getting them to their activities. Now, almost every other state in the country also, under the guidelines, is going to establish additional payments or percentages that each party is responsible for two additional categories. One is the unreimbursed medical expenses of your children. So things like co-pays and things that are not covered by insurance, those are usually going to be shared in some proportionate share between the parents, and that proportion is set by the guidelines in most states. There's also, in many states, a child care contribution. So if you have a custodial parent who has work-related child care costs or other appropriate, under the terms of whatever that state's law is, other appropriate child care expenses, the non-custodial parent may have an obligation over and above the child support obligation to contribute to those. So that all is law. Those numbers are, except in rare cases, sort of set in stone. And that is what child support is going to be. It's going to be paid. Those percentages are going to be set. Now, certainly in negotiation or mediation, you can agree to different percentages if you agree, but that's what the law says, child support. Now, what child support does not cover for many families is the additional expenses of raising children in today's world. So things like extracurricular activities, things like travel, college, tours where you're going, or college prep courses, SAT courses, cars for children, cell phones for children. All of that is not really within the purview of the necessaries. So one thing I do want to say is that many couples, in order to avoid conflict in the future, every time their children have an expense come up that's outside the guidelines or outside the child support, many people will come to agreements on how they're going to share those expenses, or at least those expenses that are agreed to in the future. Some people set up a separate child expense account and then just fund that in whatever proportion they've agreed to, 50-50, 70-30, whatever agreed, percentages they've agreed they're going to share those expenses, and then they'll just both use a debit card from that account to make those payments. That's one very popular way to do it. I've mentioned Decomply. That's an app that you can get that you can track expenses and the other parent can pay you their percentage or share. So there's many ways to handle that, but the idea being, talk about it while you're going through the divorce, how you are going to handle those expenses, rather than leaving it to be disagreed about in the future. Because honestly, it will be a never-ending discussion where every single time your child wants to do something, you and your ex are going to have to get into a discussion over it. Someone's going to disagree, and really the person who ends up losing there is your child. So the more you can agree on ahead of time, the better. So I highly recommend having a child expense or extracurricular expense provision in your agreement. Talk to your divorce attorney or mediator about that. So that's a quick summary of child support. Certainly there's a much deeper dive that can be done. I have more information on my website, divorceinaBetterWay.com. I also have a number of helpful episodes on the podcast, which you can find at divorceandbeyondpod.com. So I'll see you soon.